intro music? Yeah! Woohoo!
Hey Star Trek Fleet Command fans, welcome back! And today we're going to be talking about crewing, again, talking with the Infiltrator, Tuvok and Icheb way over there. And we'll kind of briefly talk about Special 7 a little bit. As always, my videos tend to focus on the average player, so most aren't going to have the lovely Specialist 7. However, can throw up a screenshot of an example of this crew in totality working. Now, for those curious, that is a Tier 2 Specialist 7 and 2 Tier 5 Icheb and Tuvok. And at higher tiers, they absolutely can be a wonderful crew due to what they do. Lots of ISO cascade, more shots, and apex barrier, which is great because so many crews are, say, critical based, and depending on what you pair it with, can be very, very nice. And if you want more details about that, hit me up. I can explain why that fight happened, but it does show that this crew can be very effective as a group. But what about how the rares are by themselves? That's what we're going to focus on in today's video. And for those that missed it, last week, I did a full 2-hour stream session where I broke down Icheb and Tuvok, how they work, what's going on, and everything. So what I'm going to do is, if you want to see that, like more detail of us using that, that'll be down in the comment section down below pinned. But this is going to be the synopsis of what we found from that data. So let's go ahead and start with the man, the myth, the legend, the Tuvok himself. So as we just said, in the officer ability, he's got this right here. Against players with hull breach, Infiltrator Tuvok increases your isolated cascade by 34%, maxing out at 65% at tier 5 for 3 rounds each time you score a hit, once per weapon, and it is cumulative. So obviously this is good. This means more damage creation and the most effective form of damage creation we currently have in the game, which is isolated cascade. And we can throw up that formula back on the screen for those that don't remember how that works. Now the below deck ability is also valuable, and I actually think this is where most of you are going to find value, but there's a little trick to it. Now, to be clear, I've said all month that I'm not really a fan of this idea. However, here's how it works. On round start against players, if ownership with no state, applied Infiltrator Tuvok increases your apex barrier by, for me, 14,500, 25,000 max for 3 rounds, and this is cumulative. So let's talk real quickly about what this state idea means. There are 4 states in the game: assimilate, morale, hull breach, and finally burning. So when it says on a ship with no state, that means your ship cannot have a state. It cannot be assimilated. It cannot be burning. You cannot have put morale on it, and it cannot have hull breach. So that means if somebody is attacking you with a very well-known PvP crew, say this one, you're going to have hull breach. Now Tuvok is not effective, but don't worry, that can be okay. I'll tell you why in a second. However, there are crews that you can run this with very well. For example, the new Q crew that just came out. See somebody running all these new Qs? That's one that you can run that against. Against explorers. Because explorers a lot of times are running Explorer Strike Team. Well, that is a ship that is giving itself morale, so it's not giving you anything. But here's the drawback to Tuvok and Icheb. As officers, they both work the same way below decks. You cannot have a state. You cannot give yourself morale. You cannot be given assimilation, which the mirror crew does, which the hull breach, critical, interceptor strike team, etc. crews do. You're not going to run into many PvP crews that do not apply a state in today's game. However, if you don't have that situation, it can be quite good. Now, let me go ahead and give a cool little thing about Tuvok that even if you do have a state, can be useful. So how it works is if you attack first, so if you have Infiltrator Tuvok below decks and you attack first, this is going to activate no matter what. So that means for 3 rounds, you're going to get the bonus. Well, where can that be effective? That can be effective specifically when you're talking about the mirror crew. So let's hop into this right quick. Why could that be effective? Because you have this officer right here named Mirror Hura, which increases your apex barrier by 40% for 2 rounds with assimilate. So what that means is she can then multiply all the ways you're getting apex, which would be here with Mirror Picard and Tuvok, and then multiply it. I was actually able to create 200,000, it was 197,000 apex barrier using this method by round 3, meaning that in those few rounds, even though he would eventually get turned off, Tuvok gave me helped give me a massive boost to apex barrier. But the drawback still stands, and it's important to note this. If your ship has a state, any state, it's not going to work. But if you attack first, he will proc before the states activate, then you can take advantage of that. Now, Let's move on to Icheb, who is very similar in that regard. He has the officer ability, Protective Instinct, against players with hull breach. Increases your apex barrier by 6,500 for 4 rounds, and it is cumulative. Again, it works based every weapon hit. So if you have a weapon, say you're on a ship that only fires 1 time, but it hits with 4 shots, that means it activates 1 time. So it's better to have a ship that fires 4 weapons once than 1 weapon 4 times in terms of activation. His below deck ability is Purity of Will. On round start against players, if on a ship with no state, Icheb increases your isolated cascade by 80%, maxing out at 140. And I do really want to note that this is a very, very powerful ability. That's a lot of ISO cascade right now. That is a lot of ISO cascade. But that's also part of the problem. Is it's a nice ability that is going to be difficult for many people to activate. Now, it might be easier in lower level gameplay. Let's say you're out there and you did the January meta, you ended up with Icheb or Tuvok, and you're like a level 34 player or a level 42 player. You might not be running into as many PvP crews that are state reliant. However, in the G4, G5, G6 part of the game, it becomes more and more common the higher up you go, is what I'm saying. So this is going to be hard. It's nice to have, and here's what I would really say. These officers at rare level, tier 3 and above, are going to be really nice on the bridge. And below decks, they're good from tier 1 without a state. So here's the caveat. Because they are so specific with how they work, to me, they're good for ships that have at least 5 below deck spots. Why am I picking that number? Is it arbitrary? I'll show you why. So if we go into some of our below deck spots here and look at crews, see, well, I've got a ship that's got 3 or 4. Why do I pick 5? Well, see, with here, I've got, 4. Because it depends on who you want to have in here. Picard Hugh for Origin is great in many situations. Then you have, let's talk about PvP officers we want to use, like 7, who you see I have at the end there, with Gwen DeMarco for more cascade, with Kira Nerys for the critical. All those are probably going to come before you place an Icheb or Tuvok. But once you get to something like this spot here, it's okay to take that extra risk. That way, if you do run into somebody who doesn't have the ability to put a state on your ship, and assuming you're not running Explorer Strike Team, well, then you can actually have a nice little boost there. And in fact, can actually see a tremendous growth in your damage creation because of his ISO cascade ability. So it's one of those things that you don't want to just dismiss because of the nicheness of this. And as always, there are pros and cons to niche officers. In the niche situation, this can be one of the best officers you have in PvP. What's the drawback? The drawback is the state. So it almost guarantees your opponent's going to try to put something on you. Dazok below decks to assimilate you. Hull breach with Lorca, Gorkon, or the Interceptor Strike Team. Something to imply a state to your ship to make sure that these can't activate below decks. And there are other variants of this, as we saw with Q and Rami, where maybe they need the opponent's ship to have a state, but these are the opposite, requiring no state at all, limiting to how effective they can be. But let me tell you, in those situations, they can be quite powerful. And we showed that in the 2-hour mass session we did with these. Again, I was able to create things like 200,000 Apex Barrier. And yes, I managed to take my Vorcha with the help of Icheb and took down a Rotaran. Took a lot to do that, by the way. You can see that in the video. Shout out to IronFister from IA for helping me. And yes, that Rotaran had Kingsner as captain, and I had to use a couple of boosts. But I took out over a 2 billion powered Rotaran because of ISO Cascade and Apex extending the fight. I mean, that fight lasted over 50 rounds, and the ISO Cascade really helped give the Vorcha the punch it needed to take down something that was almost 2 billion stronger. So again, it's all relative to where you're at. In terms of effectiveness, very niche. So I would say don't dismiss them, but don't rely on them, especially below decks. As you tier them up, you really do want to consider using them as an above deck, as I showed you in that initial screenshot, because you can find success there. Something to where you even consider having, if you're running, say, Interceptor Strike Team, which is up here with Gold Ducat, maybe you consider having Gold Ducat, Synergy, and then Icheb, just so that you can have that extra Apex Barrier, because we know that is currently one of the best forms of combative defense in the game. If anything, it's the best way to defend your ships in combat in the game. Apex Barrier just provides so much, but at the same time, you could argue, hey, if we're going to run a crit build, we want to have that ISO Cascade as well, because if you know, in the game today, there are ways to counter crit builds. An example of a way to counter crit build is completely free to play, thanks to the Chaos Tech free-to-play path that's been provided in the game, and that's the Q cannon. Now, yes, I was lucky enough to get a full pull of it, but it is still a free-to-play grind. And remember, the big thing with the Q cannon is it will make critical builds with your opponent significantly weaker. So if you could then help yourself by adding ISO Cascade with Tuvok, that makes up for any reduction they're going to give you if they happen to have this CT. PvP has gotten kind of complicated, and in some ways that's good, in some way that's bad. And the way that it's good is it's nice that it's not cookie cutter, and there are ways to surprise your opponent with FTs, CTs, officers, below deck abilities, etc. So hopefully this knowledge helps you decide what's best for you. And if you need any help, as always, you can reach out to me on Discord, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, wherever. I don't really care. I want to hear from you, and I'm happily help you out. We can try to tailor your crews to what works for you. But my initial thoughts on Icheb and Tuvok, very niche, which can be problematic. However, definitely too strong to completely ignore. If you pick them up tier 1, tier 2, do consider throwing them maybe on the back end of one of your ships. Nothing else. They can give you that little bit of extra to surprise your opponent. Live long and plunder. Stay safe with their Space Cowboys. Deuces, that's me. Catch you on the next Star Trek Fleet Command video. As always, thanks for watching. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. That's it. I'm out.
An even better outro than the intro. For the Empire and glory to your house.